Good morning. I'm very happy to be here with you today, even though it couldn't be in person. Uh, Perhaps it could be possible sometime in the future. My name is Jimena Perry. I'm the project manager of the Explorers of the International Federation for Public History, and I'm also an assistant professor at the Department of History at Iona University. Today, I'm going to talk about the collaboration between activism and public history in Colombia, my country. So let's get started. But first, I also want to thank Marco de Mantovsky, Barbara, and Michael for all their work they put together in this presentation and for inviting me. Thank you very much. So let's get started. This presentation addresses the case of the Traveling Museum of Memory and Identity of Montes de Maria, El Mochuelo, located in the Colombian Caribbean. I chose this example because it is a successful precedent of collaboration between activists and academia, bridging unnecessary tensions. I believe that research and activism are not opposites. On the contrary, they complement each other, producing fruitful outcomes for the people involved. Through this grassroots venue, I showcase how the partnership between researchers and activists encouraged not only theoretical and practical developments of the museum field in the country, but also promoted people's actions to keep advocating for the community's well being. This example also raises the matter of interdisciplinarity, politics, and ethics in public history. Successful public endeavors focus on analyzing and finding ways to solve collective issues. Therefore, they use approaches from social anthropology, sociology, philosophy, comparative literature, cultural studies, and other humanities and social sciences. In addition, and related to ethics and politics, public researchers and activists must have knowledge and skill to decide when to step in, when to leave, and when and how to become community mediators. In this context, and before starting, I wish to make a clarification of my understanding of activism. I agree with Anjalia Padurai's definition, and I open quotation marks, the practice of addressing any issue, by challenging those in power, close quotations, and believe that this can take multiple and diverse forms that include a wide array of political and ethical actions and even creative performances. In this text, I want to emphasize the resistance and creative components, which, in my understanding, clearly show how cultural diversity operates. In the Colombian case I'm discussing today, this creativity and resistance not only contest what are considered official powers and its narratives about the country's armed conflict, but also make the concept of activism less scary. Let me explain. Unfortunately, in Colombia, many activists and social leaders face being victimized or killed on a daily basis. Though, thus, some of them take refuge in the perceived security academia can bring. Here is where creativity and resistance come into play, allowing activists to collaborate with academia in novel ways that defy still historically established powers. Thus, in this piece, I'm using activism as a synonym of resistance based on creativity. When I started my PhD in history, one of my professors told me, "You're a scholar, not an activist." A statement that confused me a bit because of my background. I was trained as an anthropologist in Colombia and firmly believed, and still do, in field work and having an ethical and political commitment with the communities I interact with. After listening to my professor, I thought, why can't I be both? Are these activities incompatible? These questions were on my mind constantly until I came across public history by chance in a tweet. Since then, 2018, I have been getting closer to the practice of public history and have confirmed that this field provides enough flexibility to ask questions and do research without the limitations that disciplines sometimes impose. Public history has also provided me with the privilege to become more interdisciplinary in my approaches to the social phenomena I'm interested in. And this does not mean losing investigative rigor. What it means is focusing more on the questions and on the way to address them. The public history scene in Colombia, where I was born, raised, and lived for so many years, is a prolific ground to combine research and activism, understood as resistance and creative processes. Due to the nature of the ongoing violence of the country, Colombians have learned to develop cultural strategies for enduring traumatic and violent pasts. Following historian Francois Hartog in his article Time and Heritage, for example, when asserting, I open quotation marks, heritage is a resource in times of crisis, and I close quotation marks. The word heritage could be replaced by resistance, creativity, oral traditions, cultural preservation, and even cultural identity in the Colombian context of El Mochuelo, and it would make sense for the communities involved. What El Mochuelo does is to reinforce in the social groups it serves the conviction that their strength and power to overcome their difficult past relies in their own culture. The armed conflict in Colombia, which officially lasted more than 50 years, from 1964 to 2016, but unfortunately has not ended, has led many communities and researchers to get together and try to explain what happened and still happens to them. In this context, currently, there are more than 30 memory sites in the country, including El Mochuelo. And here I must mention that from June 15 to September 17 of this year, the Mochuelo is displayed at the National Museum of Colombia, making it the first grassroots memory site presented in Bogotá, a museum without a museum, within a museum, I'm sorry. This is the structure of the traveling museum of Montes de Maria, El Mochuelo, and the bird you see there is the songbird of the region. That's the logo of the museum. The Mochuelo opened its doors in March 15, 2019, and started its journey through the 15 townships that compose the Montes de Maria region. Here, as a reminder, just a map of Colombia. I'm sure everybody knows where Colombia is. And here in these two maps, you can see where the communities of Montes de Maria are located. They are located in two departments, Sucre and Bolivar. The red parts are those departments. So this is just for you to know where these 15 communities that compose the region are. In these pictures, you can see the structure you saw before of El Mochuelo. The bird you see here is the original structure that for technical reasons couldn't came to be. And down here is one of the founders of the museum, Soraya Bayuelo, journalist, and we will talk about her in a minute. The creators of the venue emphasize its non-static nature because they believe in the cultural enrichment produced by the interactions between socially dynamic actors of the inhabitants of the area. They also highlight its peripatetic character, which allows for the site not to dispense conventional glass cases and museological artifacts such as pottery, paper documents, or material culture. Instead, the creators of Del Mochuelo envision it as a space for interactive displays, pictures, videos, games, paintings, and other structures easy to set up and move around. This was a significant issue in Colombia, where we were all familiar with traveling exhibitions but not a whole museum. It also implied that Colombian museums need to update their narratives, displays, and settings if they wish to remain relevant to their audiences. The main goal of the founders of Del Mochuelo is to make people aware of the brutalities they endured during the armed conflict and to honor the victims of the decades-long war. So far, one of the founders of the museum, journalist Soraya Bayuelo, the one you see in the picture, has registered 117 massacres committed by guerrillas, paramilitaries, and the National Army of Colombia. This exercise, for instance, is an illustration of the fruitful collaboration between academics and activists, highlighting community resistance actions that generally go unnoticed. Soraya, journalist and social leader, with help from researchers of the National Center for Historical Memory and history and anthropology professors from the National University of Colombia, documented and researched these massacres, making them part of the historical record of the country. Among the first professionals who got involved with the project of El Mochuelo were anthropologist Italia Isadora Zamudio Reyes, concerned with the study of gender, the armed conflict, and peace research, and historian and museologist Giovanni Castro. They did considerable fieldwork along with Soraya and other community members. Based on the information and data they gathered, they suggested effective ways to convey the inhabitants of Montes de Maria memories of the war, their cultural resistance, history, and diversity via the museum. Also, as part of the work group, graphic designers of the Pontificia Universidad Javeriana, located in Bogotá, were responsible of its mobile structure. In this sense, the museum is the result of the work that journalists, anthropologists, historians, teachers, community leaders, and cultural promoters have conducted in relation to memory, territory, and communication in conjunction with the victims of the armed conflict. This case proves that the tension between academia and resistant community practices is pointless. The theme of El Mochuelo refers to the museum as a place of words. In this picture, you see some of the components of what the museum looks like inside. They have a playroom, a main exhibition, and dance. They want this place, since they want the museum to be interactive, they promote like games, traditional games, inside in what they call the playroom. And the main exhibition, as you see, it's composed of interactive devices like videos and panels. Uh, a place for words, a site where anyone can speak without fear and where everyone is welcomed. Memory, identity, and territory are the three main thematic axes of the museum. The curators and producers of the site believe that these topics are inclusive enough to enable El Mochuelo to become a place in which the residents of the region can recreate their traditional culture. At the Traveling Museum, territory is conceptualized as a foundation that allows people to think about themselves as lead characters of their history. Territory also addresses the body and spirit of the people of the region, represented with music and other ancestral and historic traditions. The identity element refers to the Montes de Maria inhabitants' social organization, ways of thinking, imaginaries, and different cultural expressions. Memory, in turn, is meant to be a collective exercise, transcending the private sphere. The community's part in this process use memory as a political tool to redefine themselves and their territories. The 15 social groups of Montes de Maria continuously reinvent the museum spaces. Like most Colombian memory sites, El Mochuelo does not receive funding from the Colombian state. Its resources come from international identities, such as the French Embassy in Bogotá, and is administered by the National Center for Historical Memory, the money, and the Catalan Agency for International Development Cooperation, also funded the final part of the research for the museum. This lack of Colombian state support demonstrates the limitations of the national government in memorializing the suffering of victims and communities, issue being addressed by the current government of Gustavo Petro, who is trying to bridge the gap between academia and other social sectors, such as economic, political, and cultural ones. Let's see if he's successful doing that. The words of my professor at the beginning of my presentation remind me of what anthropologist Paul Rivet stated in 1942 while living in Colombia. I open quotations. An ethnographer must or should know about anything, must be updated about all discoveries, about all advances in all areas of knowledge. He or she cannot be enclosed in an ivory tower. His or her laboratory must be a glass house where its glance can contemplate all the amazing efforts of human research. I close quotation marks. As I understand this quote, it can also apply to public historians. I strongly believe that for practicing this field in Colombia, it is necessary to go beyond the ivory tower of academia and be open, flexible, and committed to the communities we work with. I will take this further and say that public history must have political, beyond parties, and ethical stances and commitments with the people they collaborate with. Observation, as pointed out by Rivet, is fundamental, but it's essential to go beyond that. Aware that public history and other researcher or aware that public history or any other research researchers are not talking on behalf of the victims of the armed conflict, for instance, as the Mochuelo example demonstrates. Academics must be flexible enough to understand that cultures and people change all the time. Therefore, their duty is not only to observe but to co create and even co write with the members of the community. Resorting to what applied anthropologists have practiced in Colombia and Latin America since approximately the 1970s, public historians in my country are realizing that they are more mediators, for the lack of a better word, like in the Mochuelo case, professionals that might help in conversation between communities and state officials, for instance, but not academics who pretend to give voices to those who already have it. Concurring with Colombian artist Adolfo Alban, I open quotations. Creative actions are the constructive practices that not lead us to unlearn other sensibilities and open the possibility to decolonize our minds, if we can, hand in hand with pedagogy understood as a reflexive practice of the human condition. We should be able to express ourselves without fear, constraints, restrictions, shyness. We should be able to let out all that crushes our soul. To create or be creative is to dig in our own being, where our realities are, is to give our imagination the chance to talk about our own subjectivity. So let me show you the last slides of El Mochuelo. In this slide, this is the main, like one of the most important pieces of El Mochuelo is called the Tree of Life. In each of the leaves that you see there, it's the name and date of birth of the people who were affected by the armed conflict, like the names of the victims, the dead victims. Under the tree here is the museologist Giovanni Castro, who I mentioned before. At the entrance of the Mochuelo, you can read this poem. If you if you go there, I will give you a moment to read it, or I can read it myself. There are moments in history, as happened in my region. Nonsense is installed, massacring memory and enthroning human scum and its cruelty. Identity is lost, words are silenced, people are murdered amidst impunity. May the world be made aware so that this horror does not come back. May the brutalities described stay in the past. Currently, we are committed in recovering our history, in highlighting our memory and our lost identity, and words and life as mandatory actions. And as we only wish to highlight our identity, words and the truth, now we created a museum, just as we dreamt about it, as a bird of our territory that heals with its flight, our life project. We welcome this Mochuelo and its flight. This poem was composed by Beatriz Ochoa, philosopher of the region, and it welcomes visitors to El Mochuelo. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I could have answered any questions in person. Until the next time.